My name's Matthew Milburn. I'm the Executive Head at Saddleworth School. Welcome. There are up to 100 colleagues who are going to be joining us during the course of the evening for this online discussion, which in itself is inspiring to have that many people interested in tuning in. We want the next hour to be positive and focused on solutions, so we will explore some of the tiny issues that educational leaders have faced during the last few months, and in particular, I suppose, the personal leadership challenges that colleagues have had to live through and adapt to. We're going to, however, also swiftly move on to look at how individual schools and colleges have addressed those issues and what we've learnt, and how that learning has then gone on to influence our thinking about the future. If you've got any technical issues during the course of the discussion, then please contact Gary Hudson at Saddleworth School. His email is g.hudson@saddleworthschool.org, g.hudson@saddleworthschool.org. And if you've got questions triggered by what contributors are saying, could you post them on the chat? And towards the end of the discussion, we will seek to address at least some of them. With so many people engaged with the debate, it wouldn't be appropriate for all of us to be unmuted. So we're going to mute everybody except for the 4 contributors, but ask you to put questions on the chat. And then towards the end of the discussion, we're hoping we can field some of those questions. I'm delighted that Patsy Kane has agreed to chair our discussion this afternoon because she is simply great. For those who don't know Patsy, she was appointed head of Whalley Range High School in January 2007. And in September 2014, she became the executive head teacher of the Education and Leadership Trust. Patsy is currently working as lead head teacher for the Oldham Opportunity Area with a responsibility for legacy, which makes her ideally placed to chair a discussion for aspirant leaders in our borough. So I'll hand over to Patsy to lead the discussion, which is going to focus on leadership in a time of crisis. Patsy.
Thank you, Matthew, and a big warm welcome to everybody who's joined us today. Really appreciate you joining, and lovely to see some familiar faces and faces who were at the last session. I think I speak on behalf of all the leaders who are talking today, that everyone was very keen to know that nobody has an answer. Nobody has all the answers. Everybody's got part of solutions, because I think that's a really important thing. And I think when you're an aspirant leader, whether that's to join a senior team, to gain a deputy headship, or to become a head or executive head, sometimes people are held back by thinking, oh gosh, I've got to know all the answers on everything. And I think everyone was keen today to make sure that everybody knew that we're all learning all the time, and this has been a particular challenge, however much experience you've got. There was a very good quote on Twitter that I saw as we were thinking about this session, and as the title is Leadership in a Time of Crisis, but this quote was, leadership, governance and competence matter at all times, but particularly come into sharp focus at a time of crisis. So it's very much in the context for you to work out what kind of leader you want to be an authentic leader that suits your skills, suits your personality, and then it's how you work, collaborate and network with other people to make sure your schools and community are in a strong place. So we're joined by Lisa Needham today, who's worked in Oldham mainstream primary schools for 33 years in a variety of leadership roles. She's been executive principal of Roundthorne Academy, that was part of Focus, and is now deputy CEO of the Kingfisher Learning Trust and executive principal at the Medlock Valley Primary School. From high schools, we're joined by Glyn Potts, who's head of Newman RC College, which has 1,510 students. Glyn still considers himself a relatively new head, but for his work outside of school, he was appointed to the role of Deputy Lord Lieutenant for Lancashire and the North West earlier this year, and he's currently walking to raise money for Maggie's in Oldham also in the hope of losing weight. But if any of you did feel suitably generous afterwards and wish to support Maggie's, I'm sure we'd all be very grateful. And we're also joined by Jane Clark, who's Executive Principal of the Pinnacle Learning Trust, established in 2017 by Oldham Sixth Form College with Hathershaw College, and Werner Primary School joined the trust a year later, and Jane became Principal of Oldham Sixth Form College 10 years ago, prior to being that Executive Principal. So there's a range of experience and a range of phases there. So we would welcome questions, but it's not about who's got the best answer to leading in this particular crisis. It's about what we continue to learn and things that might have surprised us, and moving on into what we see as the challenges coming up. So the first question that we want to ask all three leaders is, how was it in your schools? What have you learned about yourself or about your teams in this particular time? And is there anything that you think you would do differently now? Because that's the other thing with leadership, it's reviewing what you've done, working out what went well and what you do differently. So Jane, would you like to start us off, please?
Thanks, Patsy. And hi to everyone. Not particularly used to speaking to such a large audience, at least in this context. So bear with me if I'm not great at it. I'd like to echo Patsy's point about definitely not being a person with all of the answers. So, you know, this is about just talking about our experience, really. So in terms of how's it been and how have we dealt with the situation, just thinking back to the scenario when we were first hearing about the possible closure of schools and colleges, feels like a lifetime ago already, but just to set the scene, in our trust we've got, and we have, acting principals in both Werneth and the Sixth Form College, and it's also first year in post for the principal at Hathershaw. So all three principals are in their first year of being in that role. And you wouldn't actually know this in terms of us working together, I think, because all three are absolutely brilliant, but I did want to sort of set that scene. And in the case of Werneth, the primary school, the acting principal was about 10 weeks into his post when all of this started to happen. I think initially it's fair to say it just didn't seem real, and that we all assumed it would be a much shorter period, not really knowing what we were going into, but not thinking it would be something that was still going on now and will still be going on in the autumn term in some form or another. Just to add a little bit of extra challenge into the situation for us, in the week before we had confirmation of moving into lockdown, I was in a senior leadership team meeting here at the Sixth Form College, and we got the Ofsted call. So, you know, we're there trying to plan for remote learning and possible lockdown scenarios, and we get that call. And we challenged it. It was before the time when Ofsted inspections were deferred. In fact, we were the first education provider in the country to get a deferral, but it took hours. It took from the call at whatever time it was in the morning, 10 o'clock, until about 7 o'clock that night. And we had to go through the process of bringing all the staff together and telling them that there was going to be an inspection. Obviously, they thought that meeting was something to do with lockdown, but it wasn't. They thought we were joking as well, actually. So we went through all of that. We moved on from that. On the Monday, I was at the primary school, and I got a call from Mark, who's the principal at Hathershaw, to say Hathershaw had the Ofsted call as well. So both, two of our three now have an Ofsted inspection pending as and when those start again. So that was just that little bit of extra, you know, challenge along the way for us. But I think from the early days, what's been really important from my perspective, and the key learning, I think, is the importance of us working together and discussing how we propose to address the challenges that are new to all of us. None of us have the answers. That's why I was slightly hesitant about doing this. I am not sitting here as an expert in any way, but what we've done is we've worked together, we've read things carefully, we've checked our understanding of them. I think it's actually brought the principals and myself more closely together. We've had daily meetings from the start. We've just started to reduce those now that pupils are back in. So we're not meeting daily, but it's reinforced to us that phases, although there are different things that we have to do in the different phases, because we've got all three in our trust, there's so much overlap in terms of how we operate, and being able to share the challenges that are new to us, and speak freely about our concerns. I think keeping everyone updated has been really important. The communication and the consultation has been really a helpful thing, and something that we've learned that we will continue to do beyond this. In terms of things I do differently, it's hard. There's so many things with hindsight. I think probably the key thing that has occurred to me is maybe not to worry quite so much about having every detail pinned down. I'm a bit of a perfectionist. I don't like dealing with uncertainty, but we've got to. And so, you know, not trying to have every single thing pinned down, because it will change. That's the one thing that's pretty much guaranteed in all of this. So, you know, if I could step back, I would try to worry less about that, because there's plenty to worry about. So yeah, I think that's probably everything I want to say for now.
That's lovely. I think in the way that guidance has come out from the DFE, if we didn't learn to let go a bit and go with the flow and be prepared that we're going to have to flex and adapt, you would go crazy, wouldn't you? It's been a torrent of guidance. Thanks, Jane. Over to Lisa now. Are you there, Lisa?
Yeah, I'm there. Yeah, my mic's working, I hope now. I'd like to agree with Jane. From the when this all happened, I kind of thought, okay, this is okay. We'll close for a couple of weeks. You know, it's attached on to the Easter holidays, so it'll be a month. We can cope with that. You know, it includes Easter. Getting staff together and putting packs together. We knew we were going to close, but there was behind that closure was all that uncertainty. Weren't we? There was lots of gossip going on, things on the news, things in newspapers. But we very quickly, staff got work packs together. They were able to get the passwords for online learning. All that seemed fine, because we only thought it would be a month. And then as they brought in the real lockdown, we got that sheer enormity of the crisis. In 33 years of being in education, I'd never experienced anything like this at all. Even in my own education, there'd been nothing like this. And you begin to juggle with personal experience that's going on in your own life. There's people, your family commitments. You know, I've got my mum who has dementia, who I had all those things to think about. And we were shutting down the real function of a school building, which is a place where you educate children, and to try and think about, we've now got to educate these children at home, and how do we do that? And how in some schools, particularly like Medlock, how do we keep them safe? That was the thing that was constantly going on in my mind. And actually, the idea of being separate from the children, I found really, really strange. I know it happens at holiday times, but those are planned times. And the journey that we were on, and I'll just speak about Medlock as opposed to Kingfisher Learning Trust, because we have Kingfisher Special School, but I've been working predominantly in Medlock at the moment. This wasn't in the vision of Medlock's journey of improvement. We were doing so well. There were so many things in place. The children were making amazing progress. The staff were motivated. You know, they're amazing as a team of people. And this wasn't what was in my plan. And like Jane was saying, I lost control. It wasn't what I do. And you kind of thought, this is not going away. This is here for a long time. And we know we very quickly got together our team, the SLT team, working on how we were going to deliver the curriculum, change the curriculum, the rotas, all that sort of thing. And then two of my key members of staff actually had to take time off because they had symptoms. So the deputy and one of the assistant heads went off. But what I found was the way that the rest of the team rallied behind. And it was, although it was real crisis management, and again, that's something as a leader you don't like to do. You don't like to firefight. You want to be strategic. the fact that everybody joined together and worked and supported each other. And that to me is the bit that I've learned about myself and the team. It was all right for somebody who's usually quite level-headed. I wouldn't say calm and in control, because anybody that knows me, I'm not always calm and in control, but I'm quite level-headed and frank but there have been times where I've been really panicky, and having a team behind you where there's that honesty, that we all care about each other, and that there's that openness, means that you all sort of rally together. And even though I knew that I had to lead on this and I had to look like I knew what I was talking about, even though lots of things were very uncertain, having a team behind you, and that was everybody at Madlock rallying together and working and looking after each other, because if we didn't look after each other, we couldn't do the best for the children. So really that's kind of what I've learned about the team at Medlock and how we've dealt with this crisis. What would I do differently? I don't really know what I'd do differently. I hope I never have to go through this again, to be honest, Patsy. It's not something that I would wish on anybody. And the thought of having to do this, you know, Jane talks about leaders in new positions. You know, it's just something that I hope I would never experience again.
Okay,
because it is so very, very different.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. And I think you've really highlighted the importance of being aware of your own emotions as you're trying to lead other people, and be aware what's happening in people's lives. You know, your own mother, other people have family commitments, people they might be worried about, people have been worried about their own health, even though they're the head teacher. And I think you've also highlighted it can go in stages as well, that almost disbelief, then coming to terms with it, then realising how long it is. So each phase of a crisis or challenge needs a different response, and being ready to work together to adapt that. Thanks ever so much. Over to Glyn.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, for our school, where our crisis, what we felt was our crisis, actually started before COVID. It started before Christmas, when we had some catastrophic leaks and we lost 40% of our teaching spaces. And over a period of time, that increased to close to 75 and 80% at one point. So when we came back in January, I thought, it's okay, we can manage what we're doing. We'll just make the best of a bad situation. And then a bit like Jane, Ofsted arrived, and they were so helpful. They couldn't do enough for us, and they made sure we felt truly welcomed. And they saw the hard work and the effort of staff and the difficult situations we were facing, and made no concessions to the fact that 3 classrooms had a foot of water in them at the time when they arrived. So we were kind of ahead of the curve a little bit on being what we felt dealing with crisis. So when the COVID thing hit, it was a little bit. We had a little bit of a dress rehearsal with it, with the leaks, but because it was so unique, I think I did what many probably new heads would do. You reach for your NPQH folder because there must be a module on it, and there wasn't. And then you think, okay, go on to the key. Someone will have written something about zombie apocalypse, and there'll be a checklist that you follow. And of course, you quickly realise that a lot of these things aren't actually in place. And I know many of you will probably do readings around leadership, and you know that imposter syndrome. Oh, does that kick in good right then, when you're feeling that you're the man in this leather chair, and people are walking past the glass office like a fishbowl, thinking you'll make a decision in a minute. And it was a real concern for a little while, to be honest with you, probably half an hour, while you think, what do I do next? And a bit like what Lisa said, you have to surround yourself with a team of people. And we took not only senior leaders, but we had people who really wanted to be involved in the solution for the school. And by including them, we got a broader breadth of experience, but also a more specific plan. And within an hour, we came up with a goal. And the reason why we wanted to have a goal is because I'm a firm believer, you know, my definition of leadership is you use your personal power to win the hearts and minds of others to achieve a common goal. And when COVID hit, all of our goals in education went, with the exception of one: keep the children safe. I had no GCSEs on my horizon because Gavin had got rid of them, God love him. And then all the other things that I thought I had to do, get myself ready for Ofsted again, they all went out of the way. So we set ourselves a goal, and it was a moral goal, but it was one that unified our direction. And we set out to make sure that we could provide 40 days of continuous care to our vulnerable and key worker children from 8 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night, including weekends and bank holidays. Now, that may seem trivial to you, but at the time it was a unifying statement, which meant we had something to work to, and that we knew then that the most vulnerable and the children who were going to be most hurt had some form of protection. We then obviously, classic leadership style, broke down into teams, regulated which was going to do what, set goals within individual teams, made sure we prioritised vulnerable children, children on EHC. We did all of that, all of those logistical things. And it wasn't until about day 3 or 4 into the process that we realised that the one thing that I think we'd missed, we hadn't made staff feel safe or give staff the opportunity to talk about their fear, which at this point is very real, because no matter what we say about Barnard Castle and Dominic Cummings going up there, we were told, you step out the front door, the virus is going to get you. And then we were equally being told, bring the children back in and make sure you do your jobs. And I realised that hearts and minds bit is really important. And my leadership team are a great leadership team. They did a great job of just having those private chats to make sure that our initial goal of 40 days, everyone had a valued opinion and felt safe to be able to contribute. And we made some really easy decisions. If we didn't need you in the building, you're not in the building. Just dead simple. And it gave people the space to go home and have conversations with husbands and wives and daughters, but also they knew they were contributing to the full goal. What would I do differently? Not drink as much, and possibly not pass a chocolate shop on the way home from school.
Thanks, Glenn. Well, I think we've had tremendous honesty from all our leaders on that topic. I would just come back to one thing that I mentioned from that tweet at the start about competence, because one of the things that you do get training on, or you need to seek out, is a business continuity plan for your school. And all I would say is treat that as a really serious exercise. Some people see that as a bit of a form filling, but I think both your floods beforehand or big disease, the worst can happen, and the worst we know does happen. So it's worth treating that continuity plan, because at least, if not this crisis, in a different kind of crisis, you'll have some structures and systems that you've thought through when you're calmer, less emotionally involved. And it's often an underrated aspect of leadership, making sure you've got certain plans in place. You might have to tweak them, but it is something to fall back on. And if you've not seen your school's business continuity plan, do ask to have a look at it. And one thing from that document is, which is the same for this crisis, it's really important that you get a wide range of people contributing to it, because different people might work in different parts of the building, they'll notice different things, and you need a full range of perspectives to make it a strong plan. Right, we're moving on now to what our leaders here think the short-term future is. How are schools planning for September and beyond? And what should our curriculum priorities be? So we're going to start with Lisa this time.
Thank you. Well, I think one of the things that has stuck in my mind all the way through this, and how I look at it in September, and it's right, you have to have a very clear plan. The big thing that we're working on at the moment is our risk assessment, ready for September. And that very much supports what Glyn was saying about making people feel safe. People that have come into school that previously have been shielding, say that all the systems that we've put in place help them to feel safe. They feel safer in school than they do in the supermarket. They feel safer in school than they do when they go shopping or they, personal shopping. It's a safe place to be, and we have to get that. We have to get that right. We also have to show to parents that it's safe for their children to come back. Some of the children that have been arriving back into school, as we've extended our numbers, we're now at Medlock at 84 children, and we haven't gone down the standard reception year 1, year 6 route. We have built on the fact that we kept our doors open to vulnerable, and key worker children, and we built around those numbers and built the groups up. And also as staff have been able to come back into school, where if they've been shielding before, they're now virtually full staff. There's only 3 members of staff that are now not in school. So we've got to get the risk assessment right. We've got to say, well, what's it going to look like in September? We're very much working on following the government guidance. It's business as usual, in inverted commas, and that's what we're looking at. We're looking at our children being back in school because it's the best and the safest place for them to be, not just as in it's safe because we can hopefully keep COVID away. It's safe for them as learners, it's safe for them in the environment of keeping themselves emotionally and physically, and that's the nature of Medlock and where it sits in Oldham. So that's what we are working on. So physically, we think that we will get it right. Hopefully, we'll get staggered starts, staggered finishes, all those sorts. The operational bit, we've no concerns about. The thing that we are working on at the moment is looking at what this recovery curriculum will look like. And to be honest, we're all sort of saying, well, we're not very sure what our children will come back with. We know that there's not many of them have accessed online learning, and that's to do with the fact often they haven't got the right devices in at home, they haven't got access to internet, all those sorts of things that goes along with the demographics of the children at Medlock, and the deprivation. So we don't know what it's going to look like. We know that we're going to have to do a lot of work around social and emotional and mental health. And we're fortunate that we've got those links with Kingfisher, that we will have a play therapist in school, so we can do all the therapy work that we want with them. But we really don't know what that, if we're really honest, what that recovery curriculum will be about. We know we've got to plug the gaps academically, but we're up against that all the time with the nature of our children. But it's that unknown, and it's that honesty of saying we're not 100% sure, but what we'll do is we'll assess the children as quickly as we possibly can, and the staff know that they're going to have to adapt the way they are teaching and the types of things that will go on in the classroom, and give the children time to talk, because that's what they will need. They will need time to talk. And we've not got to worry, I don't think, and I keep saying this to staff, about the academic aspect of education. Even though we're still going to have the inspections, we're still going to have the tests, and it breaks my heart to think that there's some children out there who are 5 who will be coming back into school, into year 1, and we'll have the phonics test, and we'll have to build our curriculum around making sure they can pass that phonics screening. So, you know, it's just the nature of how it is, but it does upset me that that's what we're going to have to do. But I don't honestly feel, yes, we know what we're going to do. We'll group the units in history and we'll group the units in geography. We all know about that, but we don't really know what we're going to face with the things that children have seen and experienced while they've not been in school.
Thanks, Lisa. So there's still going to be a lot more agile thinking, drawing on your personal experience and trusting your personal values. Thank you. Glyn.
Well, fairly similar to Lisa. It's interesting. It doesn't make a difference what sector you're in, primary or secondary, whatever. It's the order of attack is almost the same. We're trying to capture our thoughts within three R's really. The reintegrate, the reassure, and then the reassess phase. The reintegrate goes back to Lisa's point. I don't think I'm fully aware of the amount of trauma that some of our children would have experienced. And I don't think they are until they come back to a school environment, because, let's be honest, they're still facing it now, and they're likely to still face elements of it over the next 6 weeks. So that's quite a significant hurdle for them to face for when they return. So we know we're going to have to revisit our values and what it is that we stand for as an institution and how we behave. And I don't mean that from a make sure you line up in the dinner queue, just those common courtesies, because many of them will have only interacted with people like this. So they may well have gaps in that social knowledge. The mental health challenge, I mean, I probably am doing it a disservice calling it a challenge, because it's likely to be a cliff edge. And so we are looking at what we can do. And we've put on some training for staff around mental health first aid. And we're also having events over the 6-week holiday, particularly in the penultimate week, where our new educational health and care plan students, those who are most vulnerable, those who are causing us concern but don't meet a threshold, but you just know that your kids, and you just know that they need that little bit of something. We're doing lots of work with them, and Aaron, who's I think is on the call, who's our attendance lead, is already reaching out to those families who would quite happily not send Johnny back in September because they didn't want to send him in last September anyway. So we're doing that for reintegrate. Reassure, communicate, over-communicate. Risk assessments aren't sexy. Nobody likes them. You've got to have them. How do you break it down into a language that gives people comfort? I'm a big fan of this lady. She's a fantastic author, but she talks about having to make people safe and meeting them on their terms. And I think we've got, or certainly my job for the next 6 weeks, is to make sure parents and staff all feel they've had the opportunity to be reassured that in September we've done absolutely everything we can. And that's particularly true of our BAME community of students, but our BAME staff as well, who are probably seeing the increasing amounts of data about the impact of COVID on people of colour, and their fear and anxiety. It will be right, and it needs reassurance and discussion. And then, of course, the reassess. Easy to say we're going to test people. I mean, that's not likely to help anyone when they immediately come back. So we need to reassess what we think the start of an academic year will be. Should we spend a little bit more time giving the children chances to engage in learning, but also just let that little bit of steam out that's been compressed in them during COVID before we hit them with 3 hours of GCSE English literature on Macbeth? We probably need to look at our staff. Our CPL programme was built on an idea of the Ofsted we had in January. It may not be right anymore, and we don't do it for Ofsted. We may need to front load support with our staff on mental health and their own support in wellbeing. And above all, just accepting the fact, and I think, you know, Jane and Lisa have already said this, I haven't got all the answers. I'd be interested if people put in the chat if they think we've missed something out, or they've got a suggestion for us to do better, because Team Oldham, and that's what this is the embryonic element of the talent of Team Oldham. This is where it really can have an influence for our town, and it absolutely needs it, because when we talk about disadvantage, you know, a lot of my poorest families have the latest iPhone, and I felt that meant they could access Microsoft Teams. They've got no data, and I hadn't even picked up on that. And it's those subtle differences that actually are the problems we've got to overcome. So yeah, reintegrate, reassess.
Thank you, Jane.
I'll try not to repeat, because there's a lot of similarity, obviously, in terms of where we are. For me, this kind of planning for September kind of splits into two main headings. There's the practicalities and working with the guidance. And I note that Shahid's asked that question about how useful the guidance is. Well, yes, it's useful in that it sets some parameters. And I think that this most recent set of guidance is better because there's been a fair bit of learning. And I know that there's been a lot of input from the professional associations and so on. So I do feel that the most recent set of guidance is more helpful. And clearly we need to create the risk assessments and communicate and consult, but also bear in mind our local context. So I would also pick up on what Glyn said about Team Oldham and working together and, you know, sharing views on how we're doing that. Working with the local public health information, so receiving that. And that's one of the things that, you know, working with our trust board in particular, we've had so many meetings of our trust board and just picking up on local context and things like independent SAGE as well as the government guidance and trying to bring all of those things together in dealing with the practicalities. The plans that we've put in place for the period we're in now are obviously a helpful starting point, but what we're looking at doing in September is clearly different in all three phases. And some of the things that people have already talked about, huge variations in the experiences of our students in all three phases over this period. So there'll have been bereavements, there are definitely mental health challenges, family upheaval of all sorts, there's the economic impact, some of which is obviously yet to be felt, very different experiences of remote learning. So, you know, there's a constant reference to all of these gaps, but that kind of taking stock and seeing where students are at when they join us. And then also bearing in mind the transitions for year 6 is going to 7, year 11 going to 12, and that's a challenge and an upheaval every year, isn't it? And it's massively multiplied by these circumstances. So trying to be mindful of that as well. Just thinking of the sixth form college as an example, you know, the students that join the sixth form college into year 12 have always had massively varied experiences, but I think that's been multiplied over this period as well. So trying to be really flexible in terms of enrolment, getting that right, helping students of whatever phase get into new routines. I think similarly staff, I think that point, I think it was that Glyn made earlier about thinking about staff in all of this is incredibly important. You know, many of the staff, many staff have been in, pretty much all staff have been in all of our academies now in these last few weeks, but some for only quite a short period of time and some not at all. And that's a scary prospect, isn't it? I think there's something psychological about getting back into being in the workplace daily, and we need to be mindful of that and support staff along the way. So that's something in our planning. In terms of the curriculum side of things, a lot of the things that have been said, clearly address it, consolidating on things that have been missed in this summer term or may have been missed, and that will vary enormously. We are thinking that we really want to take stock, bearing in mind the point I made previously about not trying to get everything too set in stone too early. We want to take stock and see where students are up to rather than making too many decisions right now. But that's quite challenging for the older pupils that will be moving into years 11 and 13, heading towards exams, given that the current indications are that there aren't going to be many concessions, if any, made in terms of exams in 21. So, you know, we don't want to be making decisions now that have got potential implications for those students the rest of their lives and what they can progress to. You know, we just want to take that as a gradual thing and perhaps not ease off too much in terms of those important, you know, the subject matter that they will need, whilst also trying to combine that with filling gaps and providing support. So plenty of challenge still to consider. I don't know if I've covered everything there, Patsy.
Oh, I think that's great. And I think you mentioned a point that, especially in a leadership position, is making sure you've worked through the risks and the plans with your governors and your trust board. Because as a head, it can be lonely, but if you've got the support of your trust board and the local authority is there to check out risk assessments, you've got a band of people working with you. We can all make mistakes or get something wrong, but you've taken the best decisions with the information you've had. I'd ask everybody on the call to think about what might be the additional challenges for new teachers coming into this who have a curtailed training year and coming into a new start, because some of that adaptability for what to teach, how to assess a child, it's a lot easier if you're a skilled, experienced practitioner than if you're new to the profession. But equally, the challenge of being even an experienced teacher in a new school for kids that are looking for similarity and continuity, that can be more challenging than it might have been. I just do a plug for ASCL and the other associations. ASCL's given daily email advice, checklists, and also it's lobbying to the DFE, to the government, to try and get these concessions from Ofqual. So if you've got ideas from your subject area, from areas you lead on, please be clear that you can feed it in. They can make stronger representations when they've got real concrete feedback from people doing the day job all the time. So do feel you have a voice and feed it into whichever association you're working with. Right, finally, final section before questions. Doesn't have to be a long answer, so we've got time for some questions. What do we think this longer term future holds? How might this pandemic change education? What advice would we give to aspirant leaders? Glyn, some pithy advice, please.
Okay. The Chinese symbol for crisis is the word risk and opportunity merged together. I think COVID has given us that. We can look at all the negatives, or we can identify those bits that we've had to adapt to and celebrate and make them common practice. And let's be honest, colleagues, I think within 48 hours, all schools in Oldham had moved online and done all the safety checks. I mean, that's a phenomenal, that's Dunkirk style stuff, that. So I think we need to find our positives and rebuild that into Team Oldham and celebrate that. I think the thing that I take away from this as well is governors. My governors have been a great sense of support for me. They've really allowed me to ask those questions where you feel nervous and you say, but can we do that? And there are a lot of experienced people beyond education, and they've been really helpful, including Oldham secondary heads, which I know some of you in the primary sector will know about, but those networks have been incredibly supportive. So they would be the things I would say, Patsy.
Thank you. Jane?
I'd echo a lot of what Glyn said. I think the obvious one is in terms of remote learning, and that isn't necessarily about remote learning being the only option. So clearly we need to be prepared to use that going forward. But I do feel that we were really lucky at the sixth form college in that we'd moved on to using G Suite from September 19, which wasn't about being able to, clearly we didn't foresee this, but it meant that transition was pretty seamless in terms of students moving to remote learning. And then Hathershaw did that during the Easter break, and they'd got a VLE previously, and Werneth are now moving towards using G Suite as well. And that's fantastic in terms of the way we operate. And I know that other platforms are available and all the rest of it, but I think that has got potential, which we were already seeing at the sixth form college, that has yet to be realised beyond that. And one of the things that has happened for the sixth form college during this is that we've got this EdTech demonstrator status, which is then meaning that we can work with other schools and colleges in terms of providing some support on that. And again, not saying we know everything, just that we have gone through the process of implementing it, not having to do it overnight. So some of the things that we've learned from that. I think for sixth form students, there's a really big dilemma about next steps. The current year 13 obviously have had things turned upside down, as have so many, but when you're thinking about should I be progressing to university, it's not necessarily going to be operating in the autumn term. But then look at the economy, there aren't that many alternative options, and those sort of decisions, the whole thing about post-qualification applications and the like has come back into the mix during this period. So I think that there could well be some more significant changes afoot in terms of some of those options in the future. So yeah, and I think I've probably moved. Have I moved on to that? That was the last question, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's
looking at my notes, thinking, have I covered everything?
Lisa,
is that all right?
That's lovely. Thank you. Lisa, just briefly, so we can move to some questions.
I just think it's made us all think about how you can do a blended approach to learning. And I think we need to get better at it in primary school. I think that's, and some children have flourished with online learning, they really have. Others obviously, because they haven't been able to get access, it haven't. And I just think education, we will change as much, we'll make it even more person-centred, which is what we should do for children. We should make it right for them. And I think this pandemic will make us be a little bit even more adaptable than we are already.
Lovely, thank you. I think we've also had very positive feedback from the Oldham network about teachers learning online more, having Zoom meetings, so you're not trekking across Oldham at the end of the day. You can have a meeting, you can collaborate, and it can save some valuable time. I know there's been some very positive feedback. Thank you all so much for that. Really helpful, really wonderful insights into the way you've had to work in a situation that nobody was expecting. Matthew, have you managed to identify some good questions?
Yeah, I think there are loads of questions. They're starting to appear on the chat. And again, I'd encourage people who are participating in the discussion to put things on the chat. Somebody mentioned this recovery curriculum. I wonder what the characteristics of that recovery curriculum mean to people, because it's one of those things that sounds like a really good term, but what does it actually mean and what does it look like? Who'd like to have a go at that?
I'll throw in mine, only because you need an idiot to start a conversation for the right answer to come through, Matthew, and I play that role very well. I think for me, the consideration we're giving around recovery curriculum is we've spent so much time talking about what the curriculum is and what we want to deliver. And within that, we've identified those key concepts that children need to learn in order to have progression. What we've not had to do is consider across a number of subjects, particularly not in secondary school, across a number of subjects, whether or not a component of knowledge in one subject would mean that I can remove something from another subject and just give overview. And an example of that would be, we're looking at the moment, we've got an SLE working with us who's a year 6 teacher, looking at our year 7 transition materials, and particularly around numeracy and literacy, and whether or not there actually has been a gap in year 6 that is substantial. Because when they come into us, we immediately start the history curriculum and the geography curriculum and so on and so forth. And we do that within our attempts to try and show progress in those subjects. Would it be better for us instead to show progress in literacy and numeracy, whilst they're still getting the experience and exposure to the geography and the history, but instead focus on something that is a credible indicator of progression from their arrival, rather than an arbitrary decision that qualified people have made in the school about what the geography level 3 looks like in year 7. But it is far more about supporting the child across the breadth of the curriculum rather than subject specialism. Probably a woolly answer. I promised you stupid. I've given you that.
Thank you for being brave enough to step forward. Jane, Lisa, anything to add, Patsy?
Our school did a seminar on the wellbeing curriculum, and it was a professor, and I've just forgotten his name, but the webinar is still there to view on there, but it was quite a clear rationale and philosophy, and there's quite a few materials out there. So again, it's how you might choose those and incorporate into what you were planning to do, how you might use tutor time. A big thing was making space and time to talk, which doesn't mean the whole day, but making sure kids have a space to process the emotional things they may or may not have been going through. Lisa?
I think of the recovery curriculum not only about mental health issues and those sorts of things, but it's getting children back into the process of how they learn and understanding how they learn and how their brain works, how they look at knowledge and how they, you know, bring that back into their short-term memory. And we've got to go through those processes again of what it is to be a learner, what it is to be in school, a learner in school, and also that there's a recovery curriculum for staff as well. How we change, because we've been so reactive to things, and you know, somebody's not being able to access the stuff on Google Classroom. Can you put a pack together? Can you phone up parents and ask how you can support with putting things onto all that sort of reactive bang 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 stuff that we're putting out there? We need some time to be calm and to be reflective and to support and coach each other through this process. So it's not just a recovery curriculum for the children, but it's also for everybody within, to me, as learners in school, and that's what we all kind of are. So that's how I see recovery curriculum.
Yeah. Really good points, thank you. Jane, do you want to add anything? Or
just very briefly, I mean, I think, is it the Barry Carpenter thing
that's
that
the one.
Yeah, so there is this thing that's been sort of badged as recovery curriculum, and I think there's loads of important points in there, and those are things that we're bearing in mind. I think that there are subject content aspects as well, and where we could potentially, exam boards permitting with the students heading towards exams, but with others, there may be things that you can potentially take out, but other subject areas are much more, require sequential knowledge, and there's a limit to what you can do. So for me, whilst there is this very specific thing about recovery curriculum, and some of that we need to be able to be responsive to, rather than, we need to see what the students and pupils are coming back with, and build something that supports them. Completely agree as well in terms of supporting staff alongside that. And then there's this thing about subject content and the extent to which we've got any control over that, which we've got some, I think, but it'll vary from one year group to another.
Thank you.
Really helpful, thank you. There's also, I think, a leadership question that's emerged from the trail, and some of it's come from Shahid's point. When you're being, what I think Patsy described as a torrent of guidance, you're being almost overwhelmed on a daily basis by information about what you could do, what you might want to do, what you must do. how do you as a leader shift through that, process it, and then come to make your own decision about, well, this is what's right in my setting, in this locality right now? Because there are times when that will be in conflict with some of the guidance that you're being asked to take on board. Who'd like to kick off on that? Jane?
Yeah, I'll be the idiot this time. This is something that we very directly faced in terms of the wider opening of primaries, which was from the 1st of June, wasn't it? And that dilemma about whether we really should open from the 1st of June, were we ready to? We pretty much knew that the government were going to say that we could beforehand, because it's been leaked all over the place in advance, and that, you know, just seemed to suit. But we didn't feel that we were necessarily going to be ready at that point. So we had been working towards it being the 8th of June. And then there was the, you know, what does that public health local data look like? And we'd sort of already worked with the Trust Board working towards the 8th of June. We'd done the risk assessments, but when it came to it, I think on the day of the Trust Board meeting, I can't even remember what date that was, but some date in advance of the 8th of June at which we were going to have these risk assessments signed off. I had a meeting with the principals, and I was just feeling really uneasy about the prospect of the primary being ready to open on the 8th. And we'd looked at the independent SAGE report, which had just come out, and you know, it's just, you want to be able to rely on government guidance, but we know because it's changed that you can't necessarily take it as being fact. And there's so many difficult aspects to this that, so I was uneasy about putting forward the proposal that we pushed it back to the 15th. I was so glad that we did do that, because then there was the thing about the spike in Tameside, and then a lot of schools at that point did move back from the 8th to the 15th. We'd already done that. I mean, you know, it could easily have gone the other way and we hadn't, but I think that I've entirely forgotten what the question was now, but that was an example of it.
Using the guidance, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, selectively.
Yes, thank you. Glenn, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I think you know, the education profession should feel rightly proud for what we've done over the past few months. And it's disappointing that a lot of us find out the quality of the information from BBC News or The Sun rather than the leaders giving us the information and trusting in the profession to do as it always does, which is make the solution work. And in my previous role in my younger years, I was an army officer, and one of the hardest lessons you have to learn is that when you're in what they call a firefight, someone has to stop fighting and step back, because if you don't know what you're looking for. And as a new head teacher, getting all of that guidance, it would have been easy for me just to be at the coalface and wanting to show and prove to everyone I was doing my bit, and I'll be on reception with you, and I'll be this with you. And the reality was that's not what they needed. They needed someone to take a step back, review it, offer a direction, and then seek feedback. And that's where it really worked for us, and that's why I was grateful for my team. And we do that around our vision, and our vision is very simple, that we use our vocation of teaching to give our children an unfair advantage, leaving no door closed to them. And if we make decisions that meet that every time, we won't be so far wrong. And we might conflict with Ofsted occasionally, and we might conflict with some parents occasionally, but we will be on the whole on the right track. And the thing that means I can make those decisions, again, going back to a quote, would be Theodore Roosevelt's quote on The Man in the Arena. When we are in these kind of situations, someone does have to make a decision, and it's easy to do it in Whitehall or at Barnard Castle. We're being told to lead for our communities, and that's what we do.
It's trusting yourself, isn't it? And yeah. Any other points?
I'd just like to support what everybody has kind of said, but with every decision I think that we've made here, we have gone back to our vision and values, and regardless of what government might say, if it doesn't fit with your vision and values, you shouldn't be doing it. And I think that's, as leaders, whatever you come across, that's what you have to do. What does it fit? Is it right for my community? And does it fit the vision and values? And if it doesn't, then you don't do it, regardless of what's going on.
Really helpful, Lisa, to remind us of that. We've got time just for one final question. And when we talked earlier, you talked about at times feeling really quite vulnerable. And when you're in this situation where I get told off at school because I'm saying to some colleagues, we're making it up as we go along, but it's based on our vision and values. We're guided by our vision and values, but none of us have been in this territory before, frankly. So if you're happy to, share with us a time when you felt particularly vulnerable, particularly stressed. Jane was hinting at this with the conversation she had with the principals she works with. Where the data was actually looking like, oh, it's going the wrong way. We got that data late on a Friday evening after we'd run training for nearly 100 of our colleagues, and then we got the data. When you're feeling vulnerable, and what is it you would say to aspirant leaders gets you through? What is it that enables you to then think, okay, no, I can do this? Because earlier, Glyn mentioned imposter syndrome. You know, how is it that you managed to get through and you've managed to continue and actually are in a strong place to lead your organisation going forwards? Lisa, I think it's your turn to be an idiot.
Thank you. Well, I've felt vulnerable on many occasions through this crisis, if I'm really honest. And some Monday mornings I've thought, I can't do this anymore. This is retirement was looking like really exciting thing to do, but no, I've not thrown the towel in. But I just think it's kind of, it's being honest with your staff and saying I can't do this on my own at the moment. We have to stand together and we've got to talk these things through and support each other, and making sure that you look after yourself, because if you don't look after yourself, you can't look after anybody else. And it's those things I think that you've got to do as a leader, is take care of yourself and remember to take care of yourself. And to be honest with yourself and to be honest with the people around you. But ultimately, the thing that's made me keep going is going back to why I'm in the job in the first place. And I'm in the job to make a difference to children's lives. And if we're not in school, I can't make a difference to the children's life on Fit and Hill. So therefore, we've got to do, and we've got to do it for the right reason. We have to do it safely. But that's what's got me through this. And I think it's one of the, and I've said this loads of times, it's one of the best jobs in the world, being a leader in a school.
Thank you. And tremendous honesty there. Really appreciate your honesty and openness. Jane?
I think that not just being transparent about things, as Lisa said, is that you don't gain anything by bottling it all up. So talking to people about what your concerns are, and you know, I think having a few, that there is something about being in the sort of most senior position, that there is that sense of, oh well, I've got to have all of the answers, but actually you don't, and you get much better decisions by having talked them through with other people, and you know, just bearing in mind different perspectives. There's tons of evidence to support that. So, you know, I think that trying to not think that you've got to have all the answers, but equally be able to, what's that analogy about the duck when it's swimming and the manic paddling underneath, but this can't, or is it a swan? I don't know. I'm not it, but anyway, you know, it's that thing anyway. So talking to key colleagues, taking a step at a time, so that in terms of not letting things overwhelm you, make sure you know what you need to do as best you can, and have a list of things, but just being able to tick one or two off a list can help you feel that you're making some small steps. In my case, when it all just gets a little bit too much, just going out for a run is helpful, and I do think there's something to be said for that. Every day during the period that we weren't in, I went for either a walk or a run. Just some fresh air, clear your head, I think has got a lot to be said for it as well.
Thank you, Jane. Glenn, you mentioned your walking, running.
Yeah, no, well, obviously we're a faith school, but we have children of all faiths and no faiths. But I have my own personal faith, and that's been a real comfort to me since taking over as head and before. And I think the idea of vulnerability is important, because if the people think you're a robotic, insensitive person, that breeds the idea that people can work themselves into the grave, and that's a dangerous culture to get into your school. And it's something we're still having to work on, and I'm sure Aaron will be nodding furiously with me now, because we know we've got to strike that balance. And I don't have to be the expert on everything. I just have to be responsible for the decisions that we make, which means I have to have faith in the team and trust in the team with the ideas that they come forward. And they are always coming forward with they are value driven and well considered. And therefore it makes it easy for me to be able to own a decision, even if I have not been the one who's come up with the idea. And when you're feeling a bit blue and or a bit low and a bit vulnerable, get in the classroom. There is no greater antidote to it than getting in the classroom. And leadership for me isn't about asking my staff to jump into the dark. It's a step into the shadows where hopefully we can use our mobile to guide the way. Because as Matthew said, there's no manual on how we deal with this. So you just got to do your best with your team.
Thank you. Incredible words of wisdom and insight. And I hope everyone here who's been listening in and shared in the conversation in the chat can feel inspired, really, because there's so much talent in Oldham and so much talent in the people who are here. You've all got a great contribution to make, and you know, you've had some leaders here who've been incredibly open in a way that I don't think we are often enough when it comes to leadership and leadership courses and preparing for the next step. So I've been really quite moved by that, and that growing importance of networking, collaborating, you know, working together. It's come through some really strong messages. Thank you. Matthew, do you want to say a bit about the future? And just before you do that, could I thank Matthew for the work he's done on this network of inspiring leaders, because Matthew is leaving. I don't know if you're calling it retiring.
Taking a gap year. Taking a gap year at the end of this term, and he's played an incredible role, and he's had his focus firmly on developing talent, growing talent for Oldham, and played a really major part in bringing people together, inspiring them and wanting to support them and coach them to be even better leaders. So I'd like to say a huge thank you to Matthew publicly for the work that he's done. Yeah, I don't know if you can all see, you can see us clapping. Thank you very much indeed. Appreciate that very much, Patsy. And thank you very much for everybody that's joined this afternoon. It's been a really interesting debate. Huge thanks to Patsy and to Jane, to Glyn and to Lisa, and also to Gary Hudson, who's done all the technical stuff, and the wonderful Angela Rees, who did all the invites and put things out. The Aspirant Leader Programme will continue next year, and Lisa and the team at Kingfisher are going to take it on. So that's wonderful to know that that work will continue. I hope that the coaching trios, the partnerships and the other networks that have been established are able to be sustained, and we're inviting people to join in with those, because they're only going to be as good as what people put into them. So huge thanks to everybody for contributing. It's been a privilege to listen to the discussion this evening, and thank you all very much indeed, and good luck for the future. I wish you all very great success for the future. Thank you all. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.